Over to John Jacob Kuria, and when you hear the name John Jacob Kuria, it always comes along with a conversation of some sort, and this time round it's all about the East African community. What's the state of the region? And he's in conversation with the Secretary General, Dr. Peter Mathuki. John Jacob Kuria, the ball's on your court.
Thank you very much, Wahome. And indeed, as you rightly pointed out, we're speaking to the Secretary General of the East African Community. The conversation ranges from how the union looks like, and indeed some of the politics that surround the union. That includes the obligation, that is financial obligation on the part of member countries, as well as the DRC crisis. And we sat down with the Secretary General, that is the Honorable Dr. Peter Mathuki, and this is where I usher you into the conversation as we wind up on this end of studio. Have a look. So we're speaking to the Secretary General of East African Community, the Honorable Dr. Peter Mathuki. We are in Arusha, Tanzania, and let's speak about the state of the East African Community. Thank you very much, SG, for joining us.
Thank you.
To start off with, of course, there's been what you would say agitation to have Somalia join the East African Community. Probably you can give us an update on how that process is ongoing, and most importantly, why we need Somalia in the East African Community.
Thank you. First, I would start by saying that Somalia applied to become members of the East African Community in 2010, and that is about 13 years ago. And this is an application that has been with us. And then the heads of states met in February 27th of 2021 and made some decisions, and one of them was to consider the admission of DRC and Somalia into the community. In fact, they directed the Council of Ministers and the Secretariat to actually fast track, if I may use that, the admission process of DRC and Somalia. And this obviously is informed by their own wisdom of why we need an expanded East African community. An expanded East African community is about markets. And therefore, when that decision was made, DRC admission now is behind us. Now we are with Somalia. And last July 2022, then the summit met in Arusha. And that again issue was revisited, just an update of where we are with the DRC and Somalia. DRC had already been done, and now it was an issue in Somalia. In fact, the president of Somalia was a special guest of the summit, and therefore he was in attendance. And he put a very strong case on why they feel Somalia should be part of the East African community. And the heads of state again looked at it and said, look, Somalia already, we have our own troops from Kenya, from Uganda, from Burundi already supporting the restoration of security situation in Somalia. And therefore, why can't we, looking at it, why can they be part of formally become part of EAC? And again, the people, the citizens of Somalia, again, they're all over. You go to any of the countries of East Africa, you find them doing business already. And that, again, they made a decision that we may need to actually implement that. Send a verification mission. They made a decision that a verification mission, which is always the first stage of admission, should be done. And that began by the Secretary General. Myself, I visited Mogadishu and conveyed that decision formally to the President of Somalia. And I told him that there's a formal decision by the summit that we should start the process of admitting Somalia. And that is, I'll be sending a mission, a verification mission. And they were quite positive about it. And they said, this is what we've been looking for. The application may have overstayed, but they were happy that to receive those news. And therefore, in February this year, in 2023, we sent a verification mission to Mogadishu for the team to go and meet the government, different actors in Somalia, and see their preparedness, their readiness to join the community. And this delegation was, of course, composed of experts from all the partner states of the EAC, and they came up with a report. That report was discussed by partner states of the EAC, and after they discussed this report, it came out as again as an item during our last summit that was held in May, actually end of May, in Bujumbura, where the heads of states, they looked at, they got an update, they said, why can't you now go to the next stage? And the next stage is now discussion. In fact, they directed the council and secretariat to urgently start negotiations with Somalia and provide that report by the next summit. The next summit is on 30th of November, ordinary summit. And so this is something that a decision has been made. We are preparing now to start negotiation with Somalia. But to say, why admitting Somalia into the East African community?
And as you answer that, SG, because there are those who say, with the instability that you have alluded to, why partner states in the EAC are in Somalia today, there are those who say, with the instability in Somalia, it's probably too soon to admit Somalia into the EAC.
Soon forward. Somalia has been having independence for the last 50 years or so. EAC has been existing for the last 25 or so. So soon from what? And I said earlier that the heads of state, they are feeling that already Somalia is interacting so much closely with the East African community partner states. And therefore, naturally, even geographically, Somalia is part of fully East Africa because they are, in fact, on the eastern part of Kenya and they are bordering Kenya. So naturally, they are part of the eastern part of Africa. And therefore, it's not an issue of the instability. It's the issue of how can we work together as countries of East Africa to restore stability in Somalia. And once stability is done in Somalia, look at the huge opportunities that exist in Somalia being part of EAC. One, the bloc will become bigger. And therefore, when speaking anywhere in the global platform, talking about East Africa, the population is bigger. We're talking about markets here. With the stability of Somalia, we are able to have investors go to Somalia from any of the countries of East Africa. Look at the coastal line of Somalia, 3,300 kilometers coastal line. Is the longest coastal line in Africa. What does that mean? It means once Somalia becomes part of that coastline becomes part of East Africa. And it is going to make it easy and cheaper for transport of goods that are coming from outside East Africa, coming to East Africa. And the goods coming from East Africa going outside East Africa. Because the coastline will be huge, and therefore the cost of transport, the cost of receiving, that will be cheaper. The bigger the regional economic bloc East Africa is, the more competitive we become in the global arena. The reason why we are talking of the United States, China, Europe, Russia is because of market, big population. And we feel that a bigger regional economic bloc would make it now, as East African, to be competitive. In fact, we are looking after Somalia joins. Can Ethiopia join? Can Djibouti join? If Sudan, that is facing problems today, was part of East African community, it would be easier now for us to deal with the situation in Sudan. And therefore, imagine now a regional economic bloc that covers those 10 to 12 countries with a population of around 800 million people. What it means in terms of jobs opportunities, what it means for revenue, what it means for you as a country, Kenya, that is very an economic power, taking advantage of this huge market.
Quite an interesting one. But of course, now with the entrance of DRC, when it was admitted, it made this economic bloc a coast-to-coast economic bloc. But there's one challenge, SG, financial obligations on the part of member states. Probably from where you sit, you can be able to tell us, because, for example, Burundi, South Sudan are some of the countries that are unable to meet their obligations to the EAC. And what you're doing as Secretary General, of course, alongside your colleagues, to ensure that as you work with these partners, that these obligations are met.
Every country, of course, has an obligation in terms of what they're supposed to do. And that communication has been ongoing between the countries and the Secretariat. And already we've been engaging. Some countries are making a lot of efforts. But that is not making us to lose focus on the bigger vision. The bigger vision is to have a very strategic regional economic bloc called East Africa.
Right. Yeah. The One Passport Treaty, DRC and South Sudan are yet to ratify. Of course, you would understand DRC just joined the other day. But one would ask, why is South Sudan lagging behind in ratifying?
We have an East African passport, which is e-passport, which actually, when you look at it, when you look at your passport, is written East African Community, but then Republic of Kenya, and so is every country. Republic of South Sudan, they're already in the process of doing it. We have a program of integrating Republic of South Sudan into the community, and that is one thing we have been closely engaging with them, so that they can have passports, e-passports actually, which are looking like other partner states. And so is DRC now is in the process of getting to understand their obligations, and we are taking them through.
About 2 months ago, Kenya signed a trade deal with the European Union, that is the EU. Of course, there are experts who've described it as ambitious, and probably we'll leave it to the experts out there to talk about is being ambitious. But what about the questions of what about the other East African nations? Did Kenya betray her partners by signing the Kenya-EU deal?
Yeah, actually it's called the Economic Partnership Agreement, that is EPAs, between Kenya and the European Union. And this is a discussion that has been actually happening between the EU and the East African community. And already we are in it ourselves. And therefore what happens if one partner state decides to sign a treaty or a trade agreement with a third party, then there is a process which already Kenya has done. And that is to say that you are supposed to inform the Secretariat that they are ready to proceed with the signing a trade agreement with a third party. And the question is, has Kenya done that? Yes, Kenya has done that. Kenya has informed us that they are planning, actually before even, they were planning to enter into a trade agreement with EU. And the reasons that they gave was, one, that the industry that is supported by that agreement is huge, because we are talking about the horticulture, we are talking about the floriculture, and you know the Kenyan flowers, how and their markets in the EU, and the kind of jobs that they support and the revenues collected. And therefore now, by not entering this, then the problem would have been, would Kenyans lose? Yes, Kenyans would lose, and they said, using the variable geometry, which is provided for in the treaty establishing East Africa Community provides for variable geometry. Variable geometry means if a country, one or two, is ready to take a certain decision, you can take as others follow. And the condition they give is that, therefore, you should inform the Secretariat, and Secretariat should communicate officially to other countries that this particular country is planning to take the particular step. And those are the things Kenya has already done. And this is informed by the trade issues that have been existing between Kenya and the EU. Secondly, the EU, the HEPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, and how it is structured, the architecture of it says that that classifies all the countries of East Africa differently. They classify partner states of EAC as actually underdeveloped, and they classify Kenya different as developing. When they classify countries, other countries of East Africa as LDCs or least developed, and they classify Kenya as developing, what means is that Kenya cannot access the EU market under the same terms as the LDCs. The LDCs, which is other countries of East Africa, can access the EU market under a program called EBA, everything but arms, meaning you can take everything to Europe but arms. But Kenya cannot enjoy that because they are classified as developing. And therefore, what they can only export to EU using what we call EPA now, which is Economic Partnership Agreement. And therefore, most of the countries in East Africa would say, why should we be in a hurry to sign EPA, and yet we can access the European market under EBA, everything but arms? But Kenya says, if we don't strike this deal, then we are going to lose, because we cannot access the EU market under everything but arms, which is EBA. We can only access by EPA. And that's why Kenya signed this agreement, to make sure they don't lose the EU market, which is very strategic for them.
I think that was quite a detailed explanation. On the political confederation bid by EAC as well as one currency, and of course we will talk about the other challenges facing EAC at a later stage, but with the prevailing situation, with the prevailing condition, how are we doing in terms of achieving the political federation and a one currency bid for EAC?
We are already under a lot of pressure from the private sector, but also from the citizens of East Africa, that we must do something about it. And already the Council of Ministers and the heads of state, they assist to this matter, and we are facilitating this. Already we have gone to do the first thing, which is setting up what we call the East African Monetary Institute, EAMI, East African Monetary Institute. This institute is one that sets now the roadmap towards having a common currency. Already the council has been meeting and discussing this, and we are finalizing actually on who of the countries going to host. These countries have for shown interest. Kenya has strongly shown interest in hosting this, saying therefore these facilities. Tanzania has applied for it. Of course, Uganda has also done it. Other countries have shown interest. So it's about a decision on who is going to host. And this is something that is under serious consideration by organs of the community, by the summit, but also by the council. So once that is done, then we go to the next stage, is now having, how can we now have what we call the macroeconomic convergence criteria, which was set. And the 2023 actually was the deadline when we were supposed to have a common currency. Now we cannot have it. So now when experts are meeting, the governors of central bank are saying, give us a bit of time. And when they met, they were saying maybe 2030 is when we're likely to have it. But I challenged, I said, we can have this currency actually in the next 2 years, and it is possible, it's doable. The political confederation is the fourth pillar of our integration. And what has been happening is that partner states, we agreed and said we need to have a political confederation, and that decision is already there. In effect, the community appointed President Museveni as the champion of this. And I can say he's been doing very well, because through him, we have done a lot of consultations, and consultations are done between partner states and the citizens of East Africa. Already we have organized meetings with Burundi as a country, and they have given their views, and already we have a report from Burundi on their position on political confederation. And so is Uganda. Uganda has already finalized. 2 months ago we were in Kenya. We had a whole tour of the entire Republic of Kenya to get views from citizens and different actors on this political confederation. And in all these reports, it seems to be very positive. They are saying, in fact, we need to move faster. To them, that is the way to go. And then after this, we are planning to go to other countries. That is United Republic of Tanzania, Rwanda, South Sudan, and DRC now. And once that is complete, then we come up with a report, which then we shall go to the next level of trying to confederate our East Africa. So the first thing is getting a constitution that would now midwife the political confederation.
We have countries within the region that are experiencing domestic problems. How do you marry this entire situation and come up with a constitution that would birth a political federation when you have a situation like that?
Yes, it is true, we have national constitutions. And these national constitutions are definitely the living creatures of each partner state. But the constitution that we are talking about is how do we confederate politically? How do we work together? How do we bring closer the people of East Africa to be one people towards one destiny? And that is why the constitution on political confederation will now take into consideration the views and borrow from all these national constitutions, so that there's no contradiction whatsoever, and to make sure that now those documents now are in tandem and they are geared towards uniting our people. Because at the end of the day, is how do we unite our people in East Africa?
Let's talk about DRC, SG, and in relation to the deployment of ICRAF, the East African the community regional force. I was there for a week in April in DRC, and of course got to see the situation firsthand. But from where you sit as SG, what do you think are the major hits for ICRAF since it went into DRC, of course preceded by the forces of the Republic of Kenya?
Yeah, I must first and foremost want to congratulate our heads of state for the decision they took to restore peace in Eastern DRC, because that is what will open business opportunities for us. But secondly, I want to congratulate our forces, our men and women in uniform who dedicated their lives to go and support restoration of peace in Eastern DRC. And I think that is one thing they have done proud to East Africa, that they're able to come out strongly and support one of our partner states to ensure they have stability. And that is basically what they've been doing. And some of the things we have experienced since they went to Eastern DRC, things where there used to be a lot of hostilities and a lot of fights, that has stopped. So there's cessation of hostilities. And that is very important. And that has given now a chance to the second track, which is now the political process, which is led by the facilitator of the East African community. And that has already, we have experienced it. There's no longer much fighting in Eastern DRC. Secondly, the assignment that they were given was some of the rebels to actually withdraw from some of the places that they had occupied. And that has already been achieved.
There appears to be clarity on the part of the forces that are in DRC on what they are doing. There also appears to be confusion amongst the masses on what the role of ICRAF is in DRC. So to clear the air for those that will be able to watch from all these nations that form East Africa, was the primary mandate of ICRAF offensive or defensive?
The role of our regional force was to support on restoration of peace in Eastern DRC. Mm-hmm. And restoration of peace in DRC was within the framework of our own chiefs of command forces who met and said, the way we can support restoration of peace is first of all to ensure that there is cessation of hostilities. And therefore the issue of whether it was either this or that, it's about, can we restore peace in Eastern DRC? And are we in process, are we in progress, are we achieving that? And the answer I can give from where I sit, yes, we are making some positive progress. Mm-hmm. Yes.
His Excellency Felix Tshisekedi of DRC has been making diplomatic, what you would say, diplomatic trips to different countries, particularly within Africa. And there's some kind of agitation for him, for SADC also to intervene in the situation in DRC. I mean, what does that mean for regional integration and for a new member that just joined EAC?
You see, the interest of DRC is also to ensure that they enjoy peace in Eastern DRC. And so the objective of the president of DRC is the same objective as other heads of state. There is an invitation also for SADC to come and support. It's not in contradiction. It is simply working together. In fact, once SADC will deploy, it will work with the East African Regional Force and agree on how they are going to cooperate to ensure that they restore peace in Eastern DRC.
So far since deployment, Kenya has produced two force commanders. That is the former Commander Major General Jeff Nyaga, and now we have Major General Alfaxad Kyugu. But there's been, and that debate has emanated from Kinshasa, the need for a rotational commander. Is that a conversation you're having at your level?
Yeah, you see, when a decision was made to deploy a regional force, East African Regional Force in Eastern DRC, and Kenya had the largest contingent in Eastern DRC, automatically in the terms that they had to have the force commander. And this is a decision that was made by the ministers of defense, but also chiefs of defense forces of other countries, and that was not a problem. And therefore, when the tenure of Jeff Nyaga, Major General Jeff Nyaga, ended, then Kenya felt that it was not necessary to have a vacuum, and therefore Kenya had to have somebody. And that discussion of having a rotational that is still something that can be decided, but collectively by all the countries, and particularly the chiefs of defense forces, who are the experts in this matter.
Out here, Your Excellency, much of what we see are what you would call tensions between Kigali and Kinshasa. Of course, I don't want to mention the names here, but tensions between Kigali and Kinshasa. From where you sit as Secretary General, are those matters that have come before you? Do these tensions exist, or it's just a matter of public perception?
You see, in a family setup, there will be either one or two issues you don't agree, but that does not mean you are not a family. East African Community is a family of 7 partner states, and the countries that you are mentioning are very important members of this family. And that is why not only those, but all of them, whenever an issue arises, we give a lot of significance in trying to resolve, because that is very important. Yes.
And that means then you've taken proactive measures to end the tensions in that family.
The family is growing, and when the family is growing, it means it is our responsibility. One is a secretariat, but also different organs of the community, from the summit, Council of Ministers, the secretariat, to work together to ensure that whenever tensions arise or whenever a difference arises from one country to another, we resolve. It has happened before where people kept on saying, oh, there are trade wars between Kenya and Tanzania, or there is a situation between Uganda and South Sudan, or Uganda and Rwanda, or this country and this country. But we've been able to navigate and come out strong as a community.
As we come to the tail end of this interview, I want to take you to some other simmering tensions. You talked about the facilitator of the peace process in DRC. That is the retired President of the Republic of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta. But then the local politics in the Republic of Kenya. How is that auguring when you have his successor directly accusing him of certain things within the borders of the Republic of Kenya, but on the other hand, he's in an international platform and where he's facilitating the peace process, of course, courtesy of EAC. How are you navigating that as an East African community?
In the beginning of the interview, you said we're in Arusha, and we're in Arusha. Yeah. I'm not in Nairobi. Yeah. So I may not be privy to the issues that you're talking about, but what I can only say is that East African community is stable. The heads of states made a decision to have a facilitator, and that decision, the facilitator is discharging their mandate within the summit. And therefore, since we're in Arusha, Nairobi issues, you need to update me, because it's quite some time since I went to Nairobi. But yes, we are happy with the decisions made by the summit, and we keep on getting reports from some of these services that heads of states deployed to help them, get some of these things.
Honorable Secretary General, what does the future portend for the East African community? What does the future look like for the East African community?
I see East African community, by the way, as we speak, East African community is the most integrated regional economic bloc in Africa. And I see this in a few years to be the most integrated regional economic bloc in the world. Because, as I told you in the beginning, we are looking at an East Africa that brings together 800 million people. And when we talk of 800 million people, we are talking of half of the population of African continent. But secondly, a population that is bigger than the United States, a population that is bigger than EU. And that, what does that mean? It means market. What does that mean? It means now we are able now as East African be able to produce our own goods, create our own market, create our own wealth, ensure the wealth of the people of East Africa is taken care of, ensure that we can compete now internationally.
Thank you very much, SD, for your time, and we appreciate Asante Sana. We wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And thank you for the fantastic.
I need your support. The media fraternity, you have a big role to support all of us in trying to create awareness to the citizens of East Africa. In fact, to me, you should be an organ by yourself, the organ of the media fraternity that helps us now to communicate. Because this community is about the people. It's about the people. How do people get to know what we are doing here? They can only know what we are doing here through yourselves, who are media. So I invite you to become part of this journey of integrating the East African community.
And of course, the success of the East African community obviously also means that we also succeed. And thank you very much for the invitation. We've been speaking to the Secretary General of the East African Community, the Honorable Dr. Peter Mathuki. The future of the East African community can only get brighter. Thank you for watching. God bless.